The next thing we want to do is to decide on the exact framing that we want to work with. And in order to do that, we should add a camera actor to our scene. I want to choose the Cine camera actor, which you can find under Cinematic, which is a camera that is more close to a realistic physical camera. So it has options like aperture and focal length. Throw that into your scene and make sure you move it out a little bit as we are inside the rock right now. As long as the camera actor is selected, you will see a small preview window popping up on the lower right that gives you an insight on what the camera sees right now. The lower left, there's a pin preview button, which you want to press so that we keep this window here. And inside the Cine camera actor, we want to change the focal length to something a little bit more graphic, like 105. Now I want to move the camera backwards, and to do that, I press Shift and move the object as I mentioned earlier. Once we're in a place that we think is kind of okay, we can change to the look of the Cine camera actor by pressing on perspective and choosing the camera here. Be careful to navigate the camera while you're inside the actor, because with that long focal length, it becomes very, very sensitive. So usually I tend to just go out of the actor again and move the object inside the viewport. Once you're happy with the position of your camera, we should adjust the focus distance. So click on the Cine camera actor, and under lens settings and focus settings, you will find everything you need to adjust the focus. With the pick tool right beside the manual focus distance, you will be able to sample a position in your scene, and Unreal will automatically measure the distance between the camera and the position that you just sampled. A really nice feature is the Draw Debug focus plane, which will give you a visual representation of where your focus point is at the moment. Now, the change of the focus distance didn't seem to make a huge difference visually, as the current scale of our scene and our lens settings do not allow a lot of depth blur to happen. In order to change that, we need to change the aperture we're using. You can control the aperture of the camera by changing the current aperture setting in the same dialog. If I try to lower this, you will recognize that I'm stuck at 1.2 and I can't go lower. The current focal length and the current aperture are both controlled by the lens settings. And here you will find options for minimum and maximum focal length, as well as minimum and maximum f-stop, which is the aperture. Because of the scale of our scene, we don't see a lot of depth blur happening even on a 1.2, which is a pretty low aperture. In order to change that, I want to change my minimum f-stop to 0, which means I don't really have any limitation on the low end of the aperture. Now, if I change the aperture to something unrealistically low, like 0.01, you will start seeing pretty heavy blur effects happening in the camera. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide how blurry you want your image to be. I prefer if it's somewhere in the realistic spectrum, so I'll keep that a little bit higher than what we just had. In case your object suddenly looks like this, like the texture looks very blurry and blobby, this is because texture streaming is activated right now. And in Unreal, it sometimes struggles a little bit when you have a camera with a very long focal length, because it thinks the camera is really far away, so it reduces the resolution of the texture. In order to turn this off, just go to Project Settings and search for Texture Streaming. And under Textures, you will find this check mark, which you want to uncheck. And as you can see now, immediately my full resolution texture comes back. Texture streaming is basically an optimization mode that loads in textures based on what's visible on the screen. But in our case, again, we are just striving for high visual quality, so we just want to make sure to turn off these kind of optimization modes.